Now celebrating our 24th year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1250 with a release and air date of Saturday, February 11th, 2023. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone. On the air and on the internet since 1993, serving the amateur radio community with weekly, reliable amateur radio news and special features, we are This Week in Amateur Radio. We are the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1250 of This Week in Amateur Radio. Amateur radio is active following the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. As rescue efforts continue, amateurs are embedded with recovery teams to provide essential communications. The Bouvet Island DXpedition team is on the air. We will tell you how they are doing. Ham Radio Outlet announced it is closing one of its stores on the West Coast. $8 million in grants were handed out during 2022 by the Amateur Radio Digital Communications Group. New satellite distance records are set. We will have the details. The person who is thought to be the world's oldest amateur has passed. As the Orlando Hamcation gets underway, plans are announced for the upcoming Ham Radio exhibition in Germany. Amateurs on the International Space Station made several contacts with 2 schools in the U.S. And a new wireless transmission system is developed that doesn't require a power source. We will have all the details in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Our technology reporter, Leo Laporte, will discuss the new next-gen television standard called ATSC 3.0, and also about how big tech is changing our lives, and a little about Elon Musk's new electric truck. Australia's own Arnold Benshoff, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will discuss the evolution of software in amateur radio. Our own amateur radio historian, Bill Continelli, W2XOI, returns with another edition of the Ancient Amateur Archives. This week, Bill takes a look at a few differing amateur radio licensing proposals from the early and mid-1970s. And our tower climbing and antenna master, Greg Stoddard, KF9MP, will discuss the best procedures to follow when you have to climb your tower at night. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio here in sunny Albany, New York, it's the first sunny day in quite a while, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting from the newsroom in Half Moon, New York, I'm Terry Saunders, N1KIN.
And reporting from the ham shack of K2MST at the Museum of Science and Technology in Syracuse, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our now mud season springtime again in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the geese are flying north and the maple trees are now filling sap buckets. And I saw a girl riding her horse and a motorcycle the other day. So it's springtime here. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
How does a ham radio buff send a breakup message? Remorse code. Reporting to you from just outside the capital of Albany in Glenmont, New York, this is Bob, W3BOO, Boo Radio.
And reporting from a thawing Troy, New York News Bureau, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where Mother Nature can't make up its mind what season it is, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, checking the weather rock.
And now with this week's lead story, here is Terry Saunders, N1KIN.
Leading off the news this week, in the days following the 7.8 magnitude earthquake and aftershocks that hit Turkey and Syria on Monday evening, February 6, 2023, emergency communications have been active with rescue and response efforts. John Ross, KD8IDJ, has been keeping an eye on this developing story and files this report from League headquarters.
The Emergency Communications Group TRAC is now coordinating the primary communications. The designated primary disaster communications frequency is 28.540 MHz, upper sideband. In addition, 3.777 and 7.092 MHz will also be used as needed. Amateur radio operators have been asked to avoid these frequencies and to allow any emergency traffic. In a statement issued to ARRL on February 9th, IARU Region 1 Emergency Communications Co-Coordinator Greg Mossop, G0DUB, said the full effects of this disaster continue to unfold, along with the search for any remaining trapped people. In his statement, he said Aziz TA1E is now at the disaster area and coordinating frequencies for teams carrying out the search operations. Many countries have sent search and rescue resources, but the only ones known to have radio amateurs embedded in them are Georgia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. The Romanian search and rescue team has no operators, but it does have communications equipment supplied by RVSU, one of the amateur radio emergency groups in Romania. Traffic is being heard on 10 and 80 meters in Turkish language, so the request to keep frequencies in the area clear remains. The majority of emergency communications and traffic remains on VHF. To date, there have been more than 20,000 casualties in Turkey and Syria combined, and more than 14,000 casualties in Turkey alone, with more than 63,000 people reported injured. Aftershocks continue, and relief organizations are on site with more aid and arriving in the areas daily. You can read more of Mossop's statement and get additional information at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Aziz reported this week that due to the overwhelming dimension of the incident, some problems in coordination occurred. These naturally have an impact on the coordination of the incoming foreign search and rescue groups. As the assignment of their duty area is sometimes a last-minute decision, and this decision is made by government officials, I would kindly ask the groups to report to me for that assignment. I will then be able to inform the groups of the usable frequencies in the area. With the large number of rescue teams deployed to the country, the challenges in coordinating teams, locations, and frequencies are to be expected. With the death toll now over 17,000 in Turkey and Syria, the focus remains on getting the right help to the right place. A clear message from Aziz when asked whether any radio operators or equipment were required was, assistance of individual radio amateurs is only possible if they're embedded to search and rescue teams with International Search and Rescue Advisory Group certification, which has been accredited by the Turkish government. At the time of the earthquake, a European Conference of Postal and Telecommunication Administrations, or CEPT, meeting was taking place, and it has been reported that the Turkish delegation to that meeting confirmed that radio amateurs were being deployed in the emergency response. The earthquake affected Syria as well, and I've been trying to reach the Syrian National Society, but with no response, as they seem to have gone QRT. The full effects of this disaster continue to unfold and are now encompassing the needs of survivors to search for any remaining trapped people. This is a devastating event for the area, but please remember that it's easy for ports and airports to be blocked with unrequested supplies, so only materials formally requested by the relief agencies should be dispatched and only to named destinations, or they're likely to be blocked from import. Additional and updated information is available on the International Amateur Radio Union Region 1 website.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
The 3Y0J team has arrived and begun operations on Bouvet Island. With more details on this long-awaited DXpedition, we go back to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this special report.
The conditions have been difficult, and the team is not yet operating at full capacity. The 3Y0J media officer and East Coast pilot Steve Haas, N2AJ, wrote on Facebook that as of Wednesday, February 8th, the team has only enough power to operate 2 radios simultaneously. A storm is forecast to bring high winds to the remote islands, so the team is taking precautions. Some of the antennas may be taken down to prevent damage. And according to Facebook posts, the yacht that brought the team to the island, the SV Marama, has been moved farther offshore in anticipation of winds. Despite those challenges, the DXpeditioners say they logged 5,000 QSOs in the first 48 hours of operation. To date, the team has been heard working CW on 17 meters and single sideband on 15 meters. No matter the mode, the operators will always be listening up. That means ham should listen for them on their frequency and transmit back to them 5 to 10 kilohertz above that frequency. The operator will be tuning back and forth, trying to pull out the strongest stations. The 3Y0J DXpedition is one of the most anticipated activations in recent years. Bouvet Island is ranked second on Club's Logs DXCC Most Wanted list, right behind P5 North Korea. Near real-time updates for the team are being posted on the 3Y0J the Bouvet Island Expedition Facebook group, and you can read more about their expedition at that website. I'm John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
Troublesome weather conditions plagued the Bouvet Island DXpedition 3Y0J during its first days on the air, but the camp came through the high winds of February 8th without issues after it was secured. The Bouvet operations intended to work FT8 to give modest stations a chance to log the rare entity. They will also be working in Fox and Hound mode. The team asked operators who have already worked the island on one band or mode to not attempt another contact. The hope is that every station trying to make a contact will be able to add Bouvet to their log. There were also reports of the call sign being pirated, so those who believe they have worked the island will only know for sure from the team's uploaded logs on the weekend of February 10th. While doing the uploads on the boat, they will restock their essential food to enable them to continue the DXpedition for another week. The team has added 2 streams of FT8 in the Foxhound mode. Chasers were advised to not work the team on FT8 if they already logged a contact on CW or a single sideband. The West Coast pilot station, Rich KE1B, said the team has scaled back its expectations in response to its current challenges. Operators had intended to log 200,000 QSOs from the island, but according to Rich, the team will be lucky to get 20,000 QSOs instead. The DXpedition team wants everyone to know that the logs will be uploaded from the team as conditions allow. The operators have some access to satellite internet.
The 2023 QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo will be held on March 25th and 26th, and registration is now open. The event is a fully interactive virtual ham radio convention offering new content, networking opportunities, and more. 50 amateur radio presentations and more will be available on a wide variety of subjects. There's still time to participate in the event as a presenter. You can submit an application to present a video on a topic of your choice. The deadline for submission is February 15th of 2023. Tickets are $15 and registration information can be found at the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo website.
The ARRL Atlantic Division has new leadership. We learn more in this report from John Ross, KD8 IDJ, who files this report from League headquarters.
The ARRL Atlantic Division has new leadership now. Tom Abernathy, W3TOM, who had served as ARRL Director representing the Atlantic Division since 2015, stepped down on January 6, 2023. Vice Director Robert Bob Feliglio, K3RF of Medina, Pennsylvania, is the new Division Director. ARRL Section Manager for Maryland and D.C., Marty Pittenger, KB3MXM of Owings Mills, Maryland, has been appointed Vice Director by ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR. Famiglio was initially Atlantic Division Vice Director from 2015 until 2017, appointed in 2019 to fill a vacancy, and then elected unopposed for a term beginning in 2021. A practicing lawyer, he has served as an ARRL volunteer counsel for decades. Famiglio is also an electrical engineer and former broadcast station owner and engineer. He is an FAA-certified pilot. He is a life member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, and he has earned his amateur radio license in 1967 and is an ARRL life member. I'm John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
In an email to the Atlantic Division members in early January, Abernathy said he still plans to be involved, stating, "After having served for over 20 years in ARRL elected offices, it is my intention to remain very active in support of ARRL, and I wish everyone all the best as we head into the future of amateur radio and ARRL." Pittenger was the section manager for Maryland and D.C., one of 7 ARRL sections that make up the Atlantic Division. He has an extensive background in radio, served in the U.S. Navy on submarines, and works for a federal agency in his professional life. Assistant Section Manager and Affiliated Club Coordinator for Maryland and D.C., Christopher D. Van Winkle, AB3WG, has been appointed Section Manager by ARRL Field Services Manager Mike Walters, W8ZY. Famiglio and Pittenger will each serve the remainder of 3-year terms ending December 31st, 2023.
The private foundation known as Amateur Radio Digital Communications, or ARDC, continued to spread its support for ham radio and broader communication science and technology during 2022. According to the annual report released at its community meeting on January 21st, ARDC distributed 101 grants totaling $8 million last year. It expanded support across international borders, with 13% of that grant money going to programs outside the United States. Meanwhile, ARDC's plans for the year ahead include providing funds for 95 scholarships. 13 of those will be going to support women who are pursuing degrees in STEM studies. ARDC's 2022 survey of 44 net usage drew a response that exceeded its expectations, more than 1,700 replies. The system, also known as AmperNet or Amateur Packet Radio Network, is an internet network often used for scientific and digital purposes. Amateur Radio Digital Communications also introduced its new technical director, John Kemper, KA6NVY, who came on board at the ARDC in October of 2022. The California amateur brings a strong background of engineering management experience.
Internet Archive's digital library of amateur radio and communications is quickly growing to become an important archive of radio's past and present. The collection has blossomed to well over 51,000 items related to ham radio, shortwave listening, scanners, and related communications. The newest editions include books, journals, and magazines, newsletters, and archives of early Internet discussion lists. More than 3,300 books and magazines are now available via controlled digital lending in the DLARC Lending Library. These materials, including hundreds of magazine and journal issues, including Popular Electronics, RF Design, and General Radio Experimenter, can be borrowed for online or offline reading, one reader at a time, by anyone with a free Internet Archive account. The DLARC has also added amateur radio magazines QST from 1912 to 1961, radio and television news from 1919 to 1959, and Radio Magazine from 1920 to 1947. Nearly 1,300 episodes of The Rain Report, an audio program that aired news and interviews relevant to the amateur radio community from 1985 to 2019, are now available, including hundreds of lost episodes, thanks to the help of the program's producer, Hap Holly. DLARC has also added the 700-episode library of the National Radio Club DX audio service, which reported radio-related news from 1985 through 2015. The DLARC also is hosting the entire library of This Week in Amateur Radio newscasts. The archive of radio-related podcasts now includes QSO Today, Linux in the Ham Shack, Amateur Logic, and others. Radio clubs are utilizing the DLARC archive to provide long-term backup of content and increase their visibility to new audiences. The Milwaukee Radio Amateurs Club, one of the oldest ham radio groups, for example, is uploading its entire historical archive, an unparalleled collection of newsletters, correspondence, newspaper clippings, and meeting minutes documenting the group's history. Other group newsletters include British Amateur Television Club's CQTV, the CW Ops Solid Copy newsletter for Morse code enthusiasts, Boulder Amateur Television Club TV Repeaters Repeater, and Scope, the newsletter of the Palomar Amateur Radio Club. The DLARC library has also added newsletters from radio clubs around the world, including the Dutch Amateur Radio Union, the Chester and District Radio Society in England, and the defunct Canadian Amateur Radio Operators Association. The site now archives papers and presentation slides from 41 years of Tucson Amateur Packet Radio Conferences, including the ARRL and TAPR Digital Communications Conference and the Computer Networking Conference. The collection is accessible like never before, full-text searchable and with detailed metadata. In addition, TAPR's Packet Status Register newsletter, published since 1982, is also archived. DLARC has also begun archiving amateur radio email discussion lists, so far making tens of thousands of discussion threads available and searchable, going as far back as the late 1980s for the first time in decades. The selection includes InfoHam's Digest, Boat Anchors, a mailing list for fans of vacuum tube radios, Packet Radio Digest, and Ham Digital Digest. The DLARC is funded by a significant grant from the Amateur Radio Digital Communications to create a digital library that documents, preserves, and provides open access to the history of this community. The Digital Library of Amateur Radio and Communications invites radio clubs and individuals to submit collections of material, whether they are already in digital format or not. Anyone with material to contribute, questions about the project, or interest in creating a digital library for other professional communities, please contact K. Savets, K6KJN, Program Manager, Special Collections, via email to kay@archive.org.
Are you a new listener? Check out our webpage at twiar.net. You are with This Week in Amateur Radio.
Two amateur radio events are scheduled in mid-February to celebrate an astronomer who mapped the universe and an astronomer who discovered a planet. John Ross, KD8IDJ, reports.
The Northern Arizona DX Association has been conducting a 10-year special event countdown to the 100-year anniversary of Pluto's discovery. That planet was spotted in 1930 by Clyde Tombaugh at the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. This is the third year of the special event, which will run from February 11th through the 19th. Club members will operate from the Lowell Observatory and their own stations. They'll be using the call sign W7P on most bands and modes, beginning February 11th at 000 Universal Coordinated Time through February 20th at 0000 Universal Coordinated Time. Also operating will be W7P/0 from Kansas City, Missouri. The W7P0 station is managed by the nephew of Clyde Tombaugh, Doug Tombaugh, N3PDT. Last year's event resulted in more than 7,000 QSOs, 58 DX entries, and 17,000 lookups in QRZ. Meanwhile, in Poland, from February 17th through March 5th, the Polish Amateur Radio Union, PZK, will operate 9 special event stations honoring the 550th anniversary of the birth of Nicholas Copernicus. Copernicus mapped the universe and formulated a model that placed the sun, rather than the Earth, at the center. A complete list of those frequencies involved can be found at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The 9 special event stations will operate from February 17th at 0000 UTC to March 5th at 2359 UTC using the following call signs: SN550K, SN550O, SN550P, SN550E, SN550R, SN550N, SN550I, SP550K, and SN550NC. All amateur operators can participate, and QSL cards and other awards will be available.
Amateur radio on the International Space Station was active on February 7, 2023, with a downlink to students in the Cache County School District in Millville, Utah. Astronomy students from Ridgeline and Skyview High Schools were able to talk to astronaut John Casada, KI5CRH, with the help of Bridgeland Amateur Radio Club, an ARRL-affiliated club. 10 students were able to ask questions that ranged from how fast you're able to spin in a weightless environment to which NASA project astronaut Casada thinks is most important to us as human beings. A YouTube video of the entire event, including astronaut Casada's answers, are available online. ARIS is a cooperative venture of international amateur radio societies and the space agencies that support the ISS. In the U.S., participating organizations include NASA's Space Communications and Navigation Program, the ISS National Laboratories Space Station Explorers Program, ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, and AMSAT.
AI, artificial intelligence, can now apparently carry on a passable conversation depending on what you classify as passable conversation. Radio amateur William Franzen, VE4VR, has put a little artificial intelligence on the airwaves by creating a voice assistant powered by OpenAI's controversial ChatGPT, accessible using a radio on the 2-meter and 70-centimeter bands. In this case, we're using a D-Star digital voice repeater on VHF, Franzen explains, of the project, which will receive my test transmission, which is digital voice, and then that's sent over the internet to a server in a data center, which has a Northwest Digital Radio Thumb DV-AMBE transcoder plugged into it. The voice is transcoded to plain digital voice. It's run through a speech-to-text engine, which is then run through a ChatGPT, and then all the way back, transcoded, and comes back to the radio. OpenAI launched ChatGPT last November, offering a simple web chat-like interface to its text-based generative adversarial network technology. Type in a message, and ChatGPT replies, mimicking understanding, but in reality, simply stringing together the statistically most likely words you would expect from a response. Its flexibility has captured plenty of imaginations, but the technology has come in for criticism too, ranging from its tendency to make up facts as it goes along to its potential uses for academic cheating or malicious compositions. Those who are on the side of being interested in, rather than concerned about, the technology have already begun to integrate it into other projects, typically using unofficial Python APIs. We can now ask questions from anywhere, Franzen explains, demonstrating by keying up and asking ChatGPT's radio personality the easiest way to obtain an amateur radio license and receiving a surprisingly detailed answer in return. You can talk to the service now from anywhere you can get a radio signal. Franzen's video demonstration is available on YouTube. The source code has not been released as we come to air this week.
As amateur radio operators, we are supposed to plan for emergencies, but we can never plan on emergencies. That's why such events as the ARRL Simulated Emergency Tests, or SETs, are good, but participants still know ahead of time when and where an activity will take place. So, the Southwest District Skywarn team of Western Pennsylvania is building the element of surprise into their upcoming training exercise. Sometime before the next simulated emergency test on April 1st, they will have an unexpected weather exercise initiated by the Pittsburgh National Weather Service Office. When Skywarn is activated, they will then be told how serious the weather event is, whether there is internet or cell service, and the status of power. From then on, spotters will be deployed and begin their work just as in an actual emergency. Eddie Mishovitz, KB3YRU, president of the group, said that the unexpected is always part of a normal activation and that hams will be better prepared for an actual emergency when their training begins with a special surprise during their next scheduled drill.
The ARRL Foundation is now accepting applications for grants to amateur radio organizations. The grants program awards limited funding to organizations for eligible amateur radio-related projects and initiatives, particularly those with a focus in educating, licensing, and supporting amateur radio activities. Youth-based projects and initiatives are especially encouraged. The ARRL Foundation Grants Program accepts proposals on a cyclical model 3 times a year, in February, June, and October. Proposals for the February grant period are being accepted through February 28th. Awardees will be notified approximately 1 month after the closing of each cycle. Additional information and a link to the grant application can be found at www.arrl.org/amateur-radio-grants.
Ham Radio Outlet has announced that it will be closing its San Diego, California store. The last day of operations will be on Saturday, February 25th, 2023. Store spokesman said that it's with great sadness that we're closing the San Diego location. In late 2022, Ham Radio Outlet was notified by the building owner that they would not renew the lease. Since that time, we've been searching the surrounding area for a new location. However, recent extreme increases in rent and non-business friendly policies by the state, county, and city governments have made locating and affording a viable location all but impossible. Their press release went on to say that they thank all our loyal customers throughout the years that made Ham Radio Outlet San Diego a premier location for amateur radio operators, and went on to remind amateurs that their website is available around the clock. They also stated that their Anaheim, California location will remain operational.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Amazon is getting closer to being able to deploy Project Kuiper's broadband satellites. The company has just received key approval from the Federal Communications Commission, which it needs to be able to officially send 3,236 satellites to orbit and to begin Kuiper's satellite internet operations. As Space News notes, Amazon secured an initial approval from the agency in 2020. The FCC gave it permission to launch thousands of low Earth orbit satellites so long as it can later secure regulatory approval for an updated orbital debris mitigation plan. In the order, the Commission said that the updated plan satisfies the condition it gave the company when it granted its request back in 2020. The additional approval will allow Kuiper to begin deployment of its constellation in order to bring high-speed broadband connectivity to customers around the world. As part of its updated orbital debris mitigation plan, the FCC will require Amazon to submit a semi-annual report concerning the number of satellites launched and disposal reliability. If Amazon experiences disposal failure with satellites within a single year, it has to report that fact to the FCC as well. In addition, the Commission is requiring Project Kuiper to ensure that it will be able to deorbit its satellites after their 7-year mission is done. Making sure the decommissioned satellites are out of orbit is necessary to prevent them from colliding with the International Space Station and other inhabitable stations. Late last year, Amazon revealed that the first 2 Project Kuiper satellites will head to orbit aboard the maiden flight of United Launch Alliance's new Vulcan Centaur rocket. Vulcan Centaur is currently still under testing, but if all goes to plan, it'll fly for the first time in the next few months. Once complete, Project Kuiper will be one of 2 spaceborne satellite providers, the other being SpaceX's Starlink.
A number of new distant records via satellite have been claimed over the past couple of months. Bert DeMark, FG80J, worked Sigourney Nashu, JH8FIH, on November 25, 2022, at 0822 UTC. The distance between FG80J in FK96HG63 in Guadalupe and JH8FIH in QN14QI16 in Japan is 12,823 kilometers. Note that for future claims of IO117, only live QSOs may be counted and not those completed over multiple orbits using the satellite's delayed messaging capabilities. A new distance record was also claimed via the QO100 geostationary satellite. PT9AL in GG27OS in Brazil worked XW4KV in Laos, OK27JJ on December 10, 2022 at 1441 UTC. The distance between the two stations is 17,834 kilometers, eclipsing the previous record held by PR8KW and YC5YC of 17,378 kilometers. And finally, FO-118, launched in December, is a low Earth orbit or LEO satellite carrying 3 transponders. Familiar faces for the AMSAT satellite distance records have claimed the initial record on all 3 transponders: the VU-FM transponder, the VU linear transponder, and the HU linear transponder with the 15-meter uplink. F4DXV and VE1CWJ completed transatlantic QSOs on all 3 transponders. On January 6, 2023, at 04:15 UTC, they completed a QSO via the VU-FM transponder and then switched over to the VU linear transponder to complete a QSO there 1 minute later. VE1CWJ was in FN85DO83SG, and F4DXV was in JN04JS20PR. They completed the sweep of all 3 transponders on January 30th, 2023, when they completed a QSO via the HU linear transponder at 1716 UTC. VE1CWJ was in the same location, while F4DXV was in JN04IT22NT for this QSO for a distance of 4,908 kilometers. Anyone who wants to claim a distance record via an amateur satellite should check the current list on the AMSAT website and email n8hm@arrl.net if they complete a new record distance. Audio and or video of the QSO is encouraged but not required.
In honor of World Radio Day, which is February 13th, 2023, radio station SAQ in Grimtown, Sweden, and amateur radio station SK6SAQ are scheduled to be on the air to send out a peace message to the world using the unique 1924 200 kilowatt Alexanderson alternator on 17.2 kilohertz on CW. Test and tuning transmissions will begin approximately at 1300 CET, that is 1200 UTC, and SAQ will be on the air for 20 to 30 minutes. Startup and tuning of the Alexanderson alternator will begin at 1530 CET or 1430 UTC, and transmission of the peace message from SAQ will start at 1600 CET or at 1500 UTC. SK6SAQ has picked a set of unique frequencies with a connection to SAQ's transmission frequency on 17.2 kHz and will be QRV between 1000 CET, which translates to 0900 UTC, and 1700 CET or 1600 UTC on the following frequencies: 3517.2 kHz CW, 7017.2 kHz CW, 14017.2 kHz CW, 3755 kHz on SSB, and 7140 kHz on SSB. QSL cards will be available, and there will be live coverage on YouTube. For more information about the World Radio Day event and SAQ Grimtown, visit their website.
Astronauts on board the International Space Station were busy last week of January, using amateur radio to make contact with 2 schools. The amateur radio on the International Space Station arranged contacts with Brentwood Magnet Elementary School in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Norwich Free Academy in Norwich, Connecticut. On January 26th of 2023, nearly 400 students at Brentwood Magnet filled the gymnasium to listen to astronaut Koichi Wakata answer questions about his experience on the station. Okada told students he loves being at space and is looking forward to taking a shower, though, when he returns in March. He also told students that it's not as scary in space and encouraged them to pursue careers in science and engineering. Then on January 30th of 2023, astronaut Dr. Josh Casada contacted students at Norwich Free Academy. During his 10-minute contact, Casada shared with students how his career as a Navy test pilot helped him become an astronaut. Do the things you love, Casada told the students. During the remainder of the contact, Casada talked about the cargo vehicles making frequent trips to resupply the station and how his routine is different each day, including working weekends. The Norwich Free Academy Amateur Radio and Engineering Club, W1HLO, members and advisors installed an amateur radio satellite ground station at NFA campus in 2023, thanks to Amateur Radio Digital Communications grant, which helped them make the contact with the space station possible. ARISS is a unique STEM educational program which inspires young people to develop knowledge and skills through their participation in space science and amateur radio. ARIS conducts 60 to 80 of these special amateur radio contacts each year between students around the globe and crew members with ham radio licenses aboard the station. ARIS is a cooperative venture of the International Amateur Radio Societies and the space agencies that support the ISS. In the United States, participating organizations include from NASA's Space Communications and Navigation Program, the ISS National Lab Space Station Explorers, the ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, and AMSAT.
You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at www.twiar.net.
And now with the latest technology news and commentary from Petaluma, California. This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to present Leo Laporte.
Leo Laporte, the tech guy. Scott is not only a home theater geek, he's a contributor at techhive.com. We talk about TVs.
Indeed.
Do you go to CES anymore, or do you still do that?
Oh, yeah. I've got my hotel, and I'm registered to go this year.
Is there going to be anything this year that will be like a new TV technology that we're going to be all excited about? The launch of ATSC 3.0.
Yes. Well, that could very well be.
What is that?
ATSC 3.0. ATSC stands for Advanced Television Systems Committee.
Oh, dear. Committee is a word I don't like.
I know. Well, ATSC is the body that came up with, and we now use, the digital television transmission standard, ATSC 1.0, which is what now is ubiquitous in the United States. That's how we get our over-the-air television.
So it's over-the-air. It's the antenna
that's
TV.
That's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. ATSC 3.0 is the next generation. Why isn't it 2.0? I still haven't heard a good answer.
We skipped 2?
They skipped 2 for some reason. They went straight to 3.
That's because the tech industry hates us.
And it's going to be 4K capable. There's going to be a fairly significant online component to it. So there's going to be some IP, Internet Protocol component to it. So I think they're trying to meld online with over-the-air terrestrial broadcast.
Online with over-the-air. So what do you mean meld? What does that mean? Would that be like interactivity associated with a live
exactly.
TV?
Interactivity,
so you could vote for American
on-demand.
Idol while you're watching it using your set-top box kind of
Something
thing.
like that, yeah. I don't know the exact details, but it's along those lines. Increasing it. There's also a very strong safety component as well, emergency broadcast stuff.
That's interesting. Is there not emergency broadcast stuff in ATSC 1?
Well, there is now, yeah. But they've improved it and expanded it in some way.
Will it reach out and shake you and say, get out, get out, get out
of the house? We do have now in California, the My Shake app is available, which
it's
supposed to give you a few seconds warning
before you have an
earthquake.
Earthquake, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We had one the other day. Of course, I slept through it as always.
Yeah, we had a 3-point something here in LA too. Anyway, yeah, ATSC 3.0, it's been tested in a couple of markets. Phoenix, I think. Mike would have a better sense of that than I would.
So will I need a new TV? I guess I will.
Well, yes. TVs will.
New tuner.
In fact,
I need a new tuner or just a new TV? Or a new TV?
No, you'll need a new tuner. And I think Mike might be referring to the fact that at CES we will start seeing TVs with ATSC 3.0 tuners in them.
Yeah, built in. It's so interesting that cable has so subsumed television now. That broadcast is really a what do they call it? Redheaded stepchild to cable. For instance, the FCC rejiggered the frequency assignments, and it's been going on over a period of a couple of years. It'll end next spring. And people have been calling the show saying, Channel 7, where'd it go?
Exactly. I remember it was last month, I think, I started seeing, maybe 2 months ago, I started seeing on CBS.
Rescan.
As of October 1st or whatever,
We're moving.
Yeah,
and I think they do that. You remember the last time there was a big disruption by the FCC, they had to give people, low-income people free digital tuners, or you could get a 50 because it was going to be such a disruption. This time it's like, we'll put some ads on TV. Nobody cares.
Well, the transition from ATSC 1.0 to 3.0, I honestly don't know what their plan is for that transition. I mean, there will come a point at some time when the ATSC 1.0 transmission will stop.
Right.
But I don't think that's going to be for a while.
Right. Honestly, I think with cord cutting, I was just looking at my cable bill, which somehow went up $100 without me even noticing. Yeah, it's just been inching up this whole time. It's now closer to $300. It was $200 like 6 months ago. I don't understand it. Anyway, I'm not alone. I think more and more people are actually cord cutting, getting rid of the cable, and going back to over-the-air television. If you live near a city, near enough to get TV, it's actually the best deal in TV. Really good, high quality, high def.
Yep.
And it costs you nothing. Right. You just have to have an antenna.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Will the existing antennas work with the new ATSC 3.0?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I wouldn't want to guess and be wrong. Mike's
in the chat room. He says 1.0, the current standard, is mandatory for 5 years. Stations will have to keep it up for 5 years.
Yep.
And then 3.0 will be, in other words, voluntary, slowly rolling out.
Exactly.
Over time.
Exactly. And undoubtedly, the ATSC 3.0 tuners that we will probably see in TVs at CES will be backward compatible. They'll be able to get ATSC 1.0.
Those antennas should work unless they change frequencies again.
Well, but even if they do, they're still in the same general range.
Well, maybe. When we went to digital, it really was a good idea to get an antenna that was on those frequencies as opposed to the bigger wavelength frequencies they had been on. I don't think we'll see that, though. I can't imagine we'll see that.
I don't either.
It's just going to be what you get through the antenna will have more capabilities, but it should be the same frequencies.
Exactly. 4K, for example.
Yeah. Let's see. What else can we talk about? Politics? No politics today. Just tech. Just the toy store. The fun stuff. We can pretend nothing. It's just just the fun stuff. Although lately there's a lot of politics and tech, isn't there? And a lot of criticism of what they call big tech. And I'm torn over all of this. And I was talking yesterday to a fellow geek who's been in the biz as long as I have, almost 40 years. He's a serial entrepreneur. His name was Scott Petrie. I interviewed him yesterday. And Scott's an interesting guy because he was at Apple during the Newton. He was a product manager for the Newton. He then went to a company he founded a company in 1999 called Postini, and a name you may not know. But the idea behind Postini was to fix the problem with spam. In that era, that's all we talked about. What all this spam? My mailbox is filled with junk mail. What's going on? We don't talk about it anymore. And I think you can thank Scott and his team and Postini because they actually solved the problem of spam. Google bought Postini and rolled that into Gmail and the G Suite a few years later for something like $600 million because it was worth that much to end spam. And I was talking with him, and what I was talking about is how, and he said this, not me, but I agree with it. In the early days of the internet, we were all wide-eyed innocents. We all thought, oh, this is going to be great. Oh, boy, howdy, this is going to be amazing. Think of how the world is going to change. You'll have information at your fingertips. There'll be no fact you can't find. There'll be no, people, there'll be no more gatekeepers. If you want to write a blog, anybody can do it. You don't have to get the New York Times to print it. If you want to have a radio show, anybody can do it. You can do a podcast. You don't have to get a big radio station like this one to broadcast it. If you want to do a movie, anybody can do it. All you need is a personal computer, some cameras, inexpensive cameras, and you post it on YouTube, anybody. So the promise of all of this was so great. And then, a few years later, I think it started to settle in on people that these tools, yes, all of that was true. Everything I said was true. I mean, imagine you have a supercomputer in your pocket, your smartphone that's always connected to the internet. Always, you can use it at any time to talk to anybody in the world, virtually free. You can, that's kind of amazing by itself. You can find any fact, just boom, like that, anytime you want. You can, it's an amazing thing. And yet, we've also realized that when you give everybody a voice, anybody a voice, there are some weird voices too. There's some negative voices. It turns out the internet is the best tool in the world for propaganda, and people with no conscience who want to use it that way are very good at doing that. And I think the pendulum swang. In the early days, we were all, wide-eyed optimists. And nowadays, I think a lot of tech people, and even non-tech people, especially non-tech people, are saying, oh, man, tech's a bad thing. Big tech, that's the phrase now. Big tech's a bad thing. Little tech's okay, I guess. Big tech's a bad thing. By big tech, they mean Google. They mean Facebook. They mean Amazon. Depending on who you talk to, they may also mean companies like Apple, Twitter. There's 5 right there. You could probably say that's big tech. Believe me, there's lots of other companies you've never heard of that are big tech. But those are the 5 we're going to, focus on. And I think the pendulum might have swung too far in the other direction. And this is kind of the political conversation in a way. And I'm sorry, I said I wouldn't bring in politics, but it's appearing in the political sphere. But let's take it out of that and just talk about it. There are benefits, right? I just mentioned one of the most amazing things. I mean, we kind of take it for granted now, but it's not hard for me to put myself, back in time. I've been doing this radio show a long time, and, I was doing this radio show in the early 90s. I remember looking at that weird Apple Newton, the thing you could handwrite on, and saying, if you could shrink that down and connect it all the time to the internet and put it in your pocket, man, that'd be pretty cool. I didn't anticipate the super camera and video camera, the microphone. I didn't anticipate a lot of these things, but it is pretty amazing what we carry with us. And yeah, there are negatives. You can't go anywhere now without seeing people just not paying attention to anything except their phone. I was at the gym yesterday. I was working hard. There was a young lady who was also working hard, but the entire time she had her headphones in and was looking at her phone. She was lifting weights, looking at her phone. And it's because, honestly, I don't blame her. These things are amazingly addictive, right? Big tech. They've gotten really good at figuring out, what buttons to push to get us to come back again and again and again and again and again. And yeah, that's true. But yet, I don't want us to forget the really amazing benefits we also get out of this, right? So it's not just the bad stuff, and we see a lot of the bad stuff, and it's easy, It's the get off my lawn, you kids syndrome. And as I get older, I kind of start recognizing that feeling. Okay, boomer, I know what you're thinking. Okay, boomer. But honestly, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's some pretty amazing stuff. Anyway, I'm glad you were here, and I'm here, and I'll be here next week, and I hope you'll come by and bring your friends too as we talk high tech. Leo Laporte, the tech guy.
Are you ready for another excursion into amateur radio history? This is Bill Continelli, W2XOY, and I'll be back in a moment with another installment of the Ancient Amateur Archives.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Young amateurs who live in International Amateur Radio Union Region 1 have until February 28th to apply for Youth on the Air Summer Camp. The camp will take place from the 5th to the 12th of August in northwest Hungary, near the border with Austria and Slovakia. Organizers are advising prospective campers to get in touch with their local IARU youth coordinator to learn how to apply. There are spots open for 100 campers. Guest teams will be able to attend from Regions 2 and 3. One of the main goals of the camp is to train young amateurs to arrange for youth activities in their home countries and to get other young people interested in amateur radio. This year is the 11th edition of the camp, and it is being operated with the help of the Hungarian Amateur Radio Society, MRAS. The IARU Youth Working Group works closely with youth coordinators to arrange for the camp to be held. Previous years' camps have been hosted by Bulgaria, Croatia, and South Africa. Anyone who has questions may write to the organizers at youth@iaru-r1.org.
And now, with this week's edition of the Ancient Amateur Archives, here's Bill Continelli, W2XOY.
In 1974, the amateur radio population was on the increase again, thanks to the popularity of 2-meter FM. Incentive licensing had been in place for 5 years, and the anger and resentment over losing HF frequencies was beginning to fade. However, trouble was brewing. The FCC had several petitions on their agenda, mostly from hams, and one from the Electronics Industry Association. In late 1974, 2 bombshells were dropped. The first surprise was docket number 20282, the FCC's restructuring plan for amateur radio. Apparently oblivious to the upheaval that was caused in the 1960s with incentive licensing, the FCC was now proposing rules that would take away major privileges from generals, eliminate the ability of 90% of technicians to renew their license, and, horror of horrors, create a new no-code license. The proposal was somewhat complicated, so grab a pencil and some paper and follow along. The FCC, in essence, wanted to create a dual-ladder incentive licensing system with 2 routes available. The first, named Series A, covered the shortwave frequencies, while Series B encompassed the VHF-UHF allocations. The dividing line between Series A and Series B was not 50 megahertz as one would expect, but rather 29 megahertz, or roughly in the middle of the 10-meter band. Series A contained the familiar amateur classes: novice, general, advanced, and extra. Novices would get a power increase from 75 to 250 watts input and would also gain a 5-year renewable license to replace the 2-year non-renewable one now in existence. Generals would lose big. They would lose the 29.0 to 29.7 megahertz segment of 10 meters. They would be limited to A1, CW, A3, AM and sideband, and F3, FM emissions only. In other words, no more slow scan TV, RIDI, or radio control. Power output would be reduced to 500 watts PEP, and they could no longer supervise mail examinations. Furthermore, they could no longer be the trustee of a club station or repeater. Generals who were already licensed, if or when this proposal was adopted, would be grandfathered into the Series B technician class license. The advanced class gained under Series A. They kept all of their privileges below 29 megahertz, received a power increase to 2 kilowatts PEP output, gained access to the extra class phone segments, and would be grandfathered into the new experimenter class in Series B. The Extra class lost their exclusive phone bands, which would be shared with the Advanced license. However, they kept their CW subbands and gained the 2 kilowatt PEP output as well as a lifetime operator license. Notice that the conditional class license is not mentioned. That's because the FCC incorporated into the general license. Conditionals would have the letter C after the word general, and their license would not be renewable. On the Series B or VHF-UHF side, the proposed changes were even more drastic. The FCC, for the entry-level license, would create a new no-code communicator class which would allow operations above 144 megahertz using F3 FM emissions only. Technicians would gain some frequencies, the 50.0 to 50.1 and 144 through 145 megahertz segments, but otherwise, like generals, would lose big. They could only use A1, A3, and F3 emissions with 500 watts PEP output and could not be the trustee of a club station or repeater. However, the worst news for technician was that those who had taken their exam via mail, or about 90%, would not be allowed to renew. They, like the conditionals, would have to pass the test again before their license expired. One step above the technician class was another new license proposed by the FCC, the experimenter class. Experimenters would have all amateur privileges above 29 megahertz with a 2 kilowatt PEP output. Above the experimenter license was the extra class, which held the distinction of being the top of the ladder for both Series A and Series B. The FCC proposed adjusting the written exams to accommodate the different requirements of Series A and Series B. Element 2, the old novice written exam, would be rewritten into 2A for novice and 2B for communicator. Novices would have to pass the 5 words per minute code as well as 2A, while communicators only had to pass 2B. Likewise, the general element 3 would be divided into 3A general and 3B technician. Generals and technicians would still have to pass the 13 and 5 words per minute code test respectively. Advanced class operators needed 13 words per minute and the element 4A written exam, while experimenters had to pass a 5 words per minute code test along with element 4B. For the advanced and experimenter classes, only the 20 words per minute code test was needed to upgrade to extra. Since, except for the extra, the Series A and Series B licenses did not overlap, the FCC would allow amateurs to hold one license in each series. This created some interesting possibilities. As previously noted, a general could also hold a technician, and an advanced, the experimenter. Both the technicians and experimenters could obtain a novice if they passed element 2A. The no-code communicator could also hold a novice if element 2A and the 5 words per minute code test was passed. The FCC set a June 1975 deadline for comments on the restructuring proposal. The ARRL, still smarting from incentive licensing conflicts, wasn't going to comment until they had taken the pulse of their members. What was the ARRL's response? And just what was the Class ECB, the other FCC proposal? How did it affect amateur radio? In our next installment, the Ancient Amateur Archives will have the answers.
March 10 to 19 is British Science Week, an annual event celebrating science, technology, engineering, and math has been announced. It provides a platform to support teachers, STEM professionals, and the public in delivering STEM activities and events across the United Kingdom. This year's theme is Connections, which lends itself perfectly to wireless communication and amateur radio-related activities. The Radio Society of Great Britain has put together a set of activities suitable for children in early years, primary and secondary school. The RSGB hopes its resources will inspire all to get involved too. You can find further information on the RSGB website at rsgb.org/BSW. Again, that's rsgb.org/BSW. Meanwhile, the 46th Ham Radio Exhibition and the 72nd Lake Constance Convention, both organized by the Deutscher Amateur Radio Club, will take place from Friday, June 23rd until Sunday, June 25th, 2023, in Friedrichshafen on Lake Constance in Germany. Thomas Reed, DFTOO, from the club's International Affairs Committee, says an informal international meeting for representatives of all International Amateur Radio Union member societies will be held on Friday, June 23rd, followed by an international reception on Friday evening.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. The amateur community is nothing if not entertaining. Look at any discussion about a mode like FT8 and you'll discover people who describe it as the dehumanizing end of the hobby. In the same thread you'll find an amateur who's been licensed longer than I've been alive who welcomes it using words like revitalizing, more active and the like. If you're not familiar, FT8 is one of the many weak signal digital modes that gained popularity over the past years during the most recent solar minimum, when long-distance HF propagation was challenging. That example discussion was about the visible end of a mode like FT8, but there's an often overlooked all but invisible aspect of these modes that is much more significant, namely the popularization of signal processing in software. In many ways, amateur radio is more about receiving than transmitting. This might not be obvious, but what's the point of transmitting if you cannot receive? Using software to do the listening makes for an interesting evolution that might be hard to grasp if I start digging into the fundamental algorithms that make this happen. Instead, let me describe a process that is easier to explain. Imagine that there's a piece of software that knows how to decode digital signals. As the user of that decoding software, or decoder, you send audio into one end and call signs and grid squares come out the other end. How it does this isn't important right now. We measure the quality of this decoder by how many times it correctly does this. In other words, how many times a correct call sign and grid square comes out. The decoder can be improved by changing the way that the decoding process works. If the number of correct call sign and grid squares that come out increases, the quality of the decoder is improved. Now imagine that the decoder spits out the call sign 7 November 5 Echo Charlie with the grid square Oscar Fox 78. This particular combination emerged as a whisper decode on the 10th of December 2022. It was reported by Alpha Alpha 7 November Mike as a 100-watt signal 14,882 kilometers away on the 40-meter band. The signal report was minus 30 dB. If you know where Oscar Fox 78 is, you'll immediately spot a potential problem. If not, I'll help you out. Oscar Fox 78 is located near Perth in Western Australia. It's unlikely that a transmitted call sign in that part of the world starts with anything other than VK6. Mind you, a weather balloon with an odd call sign could theoretically be overheard in that location, but I've not yet heard of a 100-watt transmitter on 7 MHz that someone hung from a weather balloon. Another problem is that 7 November 5 Echo Charlie is a call sign that appears to be Japanese. It starts with 7 November, which is part of the Japanese call sign block, but the next symbol is the number 5, and, at least according to the research I was able to do, is not actually a currently valid call sign. The prefix 7 November 4 is allocated to the Kanto region on Honshu Island, the largest island in Japan. 7 November 5 doesn't seem to be valid as a prefix. Ironically, that call sign will now exist on the internet as soon as this article is published, but that's a whole other problem. Either way, the chances of the combination of the call sign 7 November 5 Echo Charlie with the grid square Oscar Foxtrot 78 is unlikely to be correct. It gets even less likely if you consider that the call sign was reported only once in 15 years, and over 500 million whisper decodes. I checked. That means that if you updated the software to ignore that particular decode, you'd have improved the decoder by removing an incorrect combination. You could keep doing this by checking call signs against grid squares and against allocated call signs, and you'd have made a higher quality decoder. Before you start arguing that this isn't fair, it's exactly the same process as the supercheck partial list does for people operating in a contest. The idea being that if you only recognize known contesting call signs, you've got a better chance of making contact. Think of it as a way of filtering out potentially incorrect call signs. It still leaves the operator having the option to ignore the suggested call signs and listen to what's actually coming in. I realize that this is not how you would realistically improve a digital signal processing decoder, but it's an example of how changing the software can change the quality of a decoder, and that was the point of this example. In reality, you'd attempt to discover how this decode happened and what caused it to be wrong. If you want to consider a more signal-centric example, consider a decoder that starts with the first attempt at making a decode. With a single decode, it can then remove that known signal from the original audio and start another decoding cycle. You can repeat this as many times as you want until you end up with gibberish. Essentially, this is an example of how a modern decoder can improve its performance. This is why signal processing in software is so powerful and important, and why FT8 and the rest of the digital firmament are here to stay. I should point out, for those wondering, FT8 and Whisper are examples of simple messages, but there's nothing stopping us from using digital messages like this to exchange little bits of audio, or video, or something else. It's how mobile phones work today, and at some point amateur radio is going to extend the envelope and come up with the next thing. It always does. So, FT8, it's changing amateur radio, but not because we're glued to a screen having our computer talk to another one, but because it represents digital signal processing in software, and it's just the beginning. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, has filed this week's AMSAT report, and another satellite has met its demise. AO-95, or Fox-1 Cliff, ceased operations on December 23, 2022. Although highly unlikely, it will return to life as AO-7 has done. There's a very slim chance that this could happen, but not expected to. The satellite was never put into full use as the receiver was, as you might say, hard of hearing. The reason was unknown. The satellite did continue, though, to provide telemetry. Transmissions were good from satellite, however, no uplinks could be made, even when tried with some high-powered stations. AMSAT continues to work on the Golf series of satellites. If you have been working the satellites, don't forget there are many awards that you can earn. The ARRL has a few, as does AMSAT. You can check them out at either association's websites. Remember, paper is a great way to show your accomplishments.
It is time for the weekly propagation forecast report, brought to us each week by Tad Cook, K7RA, in Seattle, Washington, who reports that a period of rising solar activity returned this week. 10 new sunspot groups appeared this reporting week, which covered February 2nd through the 8th. 2 appeared on February 3rd, 1 each on February 4th and 5th, 4 appeared on February 6th, and 2 more on February 8th. Early on February 9th, SpaceWeather.com reported a large emerging sunspot over the sun's southeast horizon. The average daily sunspot number for this week rose from 80.7 to 95.1, and the average daily solar flux rose from 139.5 to 155.9. On Thursday, February 9th, both the sunspot number and the solar flux were above the average for the previous 7 days. Sunspot number count at 150 compared to the average of 95.1, and solar flux at 214.9 compared to the average of 155.9, both indicating an upward trend. Geomagnetic indicators rose as well. The planetary A index rose from 7.9 to 11.7, and the middle latitude numbers rose from 5.9 to 7.6. The rise in geomagnetic activity was related to solar wind late in the reporting week. The rise in geomagnetic activity was related to a solar wind stream which occurred late in the reporting week. So looking ahead, the predicted solar flux is 212 on February 11th through the 13th, then 208, 205, and 202 on February 14th through the 16th, 150 on February 17th through the 18th, and then 145, 140, 135, 130, and 135 on February 19th through the 23rd. Taking a look now at the predicted planetary A index, it will be 8 on February 11th, then 5 on the 12th through the 17th, 8 on February 18th and 19th, 5 on February 20th and 21st, and 10 on February 22nd through the 24th.
Looking for older editions of our news service? You can find them all as part of the digital library of amateur radio and communications through the facilities of the Internet Archive. You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
In radio sport contesting, remember the year-long ARRL Volunteers on the Air VOTA continues. At their website, you can see the state activation schedule for the weekly W1AW portable operations, including these. February 15th through the 21st, Wisconsin, W1AW/9. February 15th through the 21st in California, W1AW/6. And February 22nd through the 28th in Michigan, W1AW/8. And also February 28th, 22nd through the 28th in Florida, W1AW/4. Upcoming contests this week, February 11th through the 12th, the Dutch PACC contest, that's CW and phone. February 11th and 12th, the SKCC Weekend Sprintathon, that's CW. February 11th through the 13th, the YLRL YL.OM contest, that's CW, phone, and digital. And on February 11th through the 12th, it's the OMIS QSO party, that is phone. Some upcoming section and state division conventions to be aware of. February 10th through the 12th, it's the Orlando Hamcation, hosting the ARRL Southeastern Division Convention in Orlando, Florida. February 17th through the 18th, the LCARC Winterfest. The ARL Arkansas State Convention goes along with that in Hoxie, Arkansas. February 25th, HamCon, hosting the ARRL Vermont State Convention. That's in Colchester, Vermont. And on March 3rd and 4th, the Birmingham Fest, hosting the ARRL Alabama Section Convention. That's in Trussville, Alabama.
The Irish Radio Transmitting Society are reporting the SSTV unit aboard the ISS has completely failed. The interface card connecting the radios with a computer suffered damage beyond repair. New laptops are also being used, which require new interface components from the ARIS Russia team. ARIS Russia is developing this new interface and is consulting the ARIS International hardware and software team. Sergei Sambarov, RV3DR, stated that they don't expect to complete the SSTV development efforts until early 2024, and the hardware will be transported to the ISS on a progress flight later in 2024. Until then, there will be no more slow-scan television coming from the space station. Fade to black.
Activators on Summits on the Air in South Africa are marking 20 years in the program by urging all participants to either hunt or activate a summit on February 18th. Activators will be posting their proposed times on the WhatsApp group and Facebook page of ZS-SODA. South Africa became part of Summits on the Air on January 1, 2003, when the first two summits were activated by Andrew Ruse, then using the call sign ZS1AN. On that day, Andrew, now call sign ZS5U, operated CW from Lion's Head, SOTA number ZS/WC-058, and McClear's Beacon, SOTA number ZS/WC-043. All hams who participate in the 20th anniversary activity will receive a commemorative certificate.
Registration is now open for the 22nd USA Radio Orienteering Championships. John Ross, KD8IDJ, has more in this report.
And in case you're wondering what orienteering is, well, it's quickly becoming the new name for amateur radio direction finding. The event will be held April 19th to the 23rd at Cooper Lake State Park in Texas and is hosted by the New Mexico Orienteers in Albuquerque, New Mexico, using maps provided by the North Texas Orienteering Association. The White Rock Lake Amateur Radio Club will provide communications support for the event. The name Radio Orienteering has been transitioning to its new name, but it is actually the same radio navigation sport known as amateur radio direction finding. That sport involves using special radio receivers to find hidden transmitters in timed events. USA ARDF co-coordinator Jerry Boyd, WBA WFK, said the event is open to everyone of all ages, and 3 medals will be awarded for first, second, and third place in all groups. We have events beginning with what's called the Sprint, said Boyd. Participants will have 60 minutes to find their transmitters. After that, 3 more events in the Fox O, 2 classic events, all lasting 3 hours. And results of the competitions on April 20th through the 23rd will help determine the members of Team USA who will compete in the ARDF World Championship scheduled for the fall of 2023 in Liberec, Czech Republic. I'm John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
Charles E. Charlot, NZ0I, the USA ARDF co-coordinator, said they are hoping for a good turnout. It is difficult to estimate attendance this year. We can accommodate up to 100 persons, said Charlot. Historically, we've had about 35 or fewer competitors in non-pandemic years, but we are hearing rumors of many people who are eager to get out and do things, so perhaps attendance will be up this year. Charlot said, this year everyone participating in or attending the event will need to pay a $5 parking fee at the park. Detailed information about registration, links to the event site, and more information about radio orienteering is available on the ARRL website.
In India, a man with hearing and speech impairments and a history of wandering from home when under stress was reunited with his family with the help of amateur radio operators. The involvement of amateur radio operators from Kolkata ended a long search by the family of a 58-year-old man who turned up at the religious pilgrimage known as the Gangasagar Mela last month. The Mela was held about 100 kilometers south of Kolkata, which is headquarters to the West Bengal Radio Club, whose hams assist every year to ensure safety and communications of the pilgrimage. The hams noticed the man was in distress, but because of his challenges, they could not communicate successfully with him. According to local media, he turned out to be from Khammam in the Indian state of Telangana. Members of the club receive special training in helping communicate with individuals who may be unable to speak or in cases where there is a language barrier. The club's secretary, Ambarish Nagbiswas, VU2JFA, said that the man's responses to certain photographs help them determine the region where he resides. By late January, the mystery was solved. The man, who had been moved to living quarters at a local mission, was successfully identified, and his family was contacted by the police. Ambarish Nagbiswas was then able to communicate with the man with the help of Ram Mohan Suri, VU2MYH, director of the National Institute of Amateur Radio, who can speak the man's language, Telugu. Arrangements were made for his son to retrieve him and return him home. Debus Mandal, VU3ZII, assisted in his transfer back to his family with the help of the police.
Raymond Paul Richard, W4RRR of Ocala, Florida, grew up in Michigan, where he became an active amateur radio operator at the age of 14. A generous donor and life member of the ARRL, he belonged to its Maxim Society, a group whose membership comprises ARRL benefactors. At the time of his death on January 30th, at the age of 65, Ray was serving as advance ticket chairman of the Orlando Hamcation, which is also the ARRL's Southeastern Division convention. He was active in the Orlando Amateur Radio Club, and he previously served as its membership chairman. His range of work on behalf of the club earned him the group's KB4UT Wayne Nelson Amateur Radio of the Year Award in 2019. The award is named for the club's former president, who became a silent key in 2001.
A Barbados amateur radio operator, thought to be among the world's oldest, has died. Winston Woody A. Richardson, SP6CC, passed away on February 1st. He was 108 years old. Richardson was born on the Isle of Santa Lucia and was first licensed as VP6WR before Barbados achieved its independence from the United Kingdom. I first met him in September of 1967, and we were lifelong friends, said Jim Niger, N6TJ. He had a modest station at Upton Terrace in the suburbs of Bridgetown, Barbados, and was formerly the superintendent of the Barbados Water Authority. Richardson hosted Niger's 8P6J contest operations, which included a number 2 spot in the 1980 ARRL DXCW test, and several top 5 spots in the CQ Worldwide DXCW contests from 1980 to 1982. The Woody Richardson's Communications Room at the Amateur Radio Society of Barbados is named after him. Richardson visited the headquarters of the Amateur Radio Society of Barbados in 2020.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
An old rocket body and military satellite, large pieces of space junk dating back to the Soviet Union, nearly smashed into each other this past Friday morning in an uncomfortable near miss that would have resulted in thousands of pieces of debris had they collided. Leo Labs, a private company that tracks satellites and derelict objects in low Earth orbit, spotted the near collision in radar data. The company, which can track objects as tiny as 3.9 inches or 10 centimeters in diameter, operates 3 radar stations, 2 in the U.S. and 1 in New Zealand. The 2 objects whizzed past each other at an altitude of 611 miles, or just 984 kilometers, on the morning of Friday, January 27th. Leo Labs computed a missed distance of only 6 meters, or 20 feet, with an error margin of only a few tenths of a meter, the company said in a tweet. That is unbelievably close, as Harvard-Smithsonian astrophysicist Jonathan McDowell conveyed in a graphic posted to Twitter. The SL-8 rocket body, specifically its second stage, had been in space since 1986, while the Cosmos 2361 military satellite, known as Paris, launched to low Earth orbit in 1998. A collision between the 2 objects would have produced thousands of new debris fragments that would have lingered in Earth orbit for decades. The conjunction happened in an orbital bad neighborhood located between 590 and 652 miles above the surface, according to Leo Labs. This band has significant debris generating potential in low Earth orbit due to a mix of breakup events and abandoned derelict objects, the company explained in a series of tweets. The so-called bad neighborhood hosts around 160 SL-8 rocket bodies, along with their roughly 160 payloads launched decades ago. Leo Labs says around 1,400 conjunctions involving these rocket bodies were chronicled between June and September 2022. Leo Labs describes this type of potential collision between 2 massive derelict objects as a worst-case scenario, saying it would be largely out of our control and would likely result in a ripple effect of dangerous collision encounters. Indeed, a collision on this scale would most certainly accelerate the ongoing Kessler syndrome, the steady accumulation of space debris that threatens to make portions of Earth's orbit inaccessible. Near misses in space are becoming increasingly common, whether it's conjunctions between defunct satellites or clouds of debris that threaten the International Space Station. Avoidance maneuvers are now a steady fixture for satellite operators, with SpaceX, as an extreme example, having to perform over 26,000 collision avoidance maneuvers of its Starlink satellites from December 1st, 2020 to November 30th, 2022. In addition to focusing on collision avoidance, Leo Labs recommends the implementation of debris mitigation and debris remediation efforts. This could take the form of sensible guidelines having to do with the removal of satellites once they've been retired, as well as the introduction of debris removal technologies.
After a lingering illness of the battery, the AO-95 amateur satellite passed away peacefully on December 23rd. While a miraculous return is always possible, it is not expected. AO-95, known prior to launch as Fox 1 Cliff to commemorate amateur satellite pioneer Cliff Buschardt, K7RR, who became a silent key in 2007, launched on December 3, 2018 on a SpaceX Falcon 9 from Vandenberg Air Force Base. Shortly after deployment, the AMSAT engineering team received nominal telemetry data from the satellite, but upon the first attempts at commanding, it was discovered that the receiver had failed for unknown reasons. Still, the satellite provided an easy-to-receive beacon and telemetry data for over 4 years before the NICAD batteries failed.
And now, with his segment on tower climbing and antenna safety, here is Arizona's own Greg Stoddard, KF9MP.
Over the years I've been a tower climber, I've had to work at night. And when I tell people I climb at night, I usually get more comments from that than I do from climbing in general. Most of the towers I've been on are close to populated areas, and since most populated areas are full of streetlights, I've noticed that most of these towers are easily seen at night, and I often do not use my headlamp while climbing up the tower. Now this may only apply to towers less than 200 feet tall, or job sites on the tower lower than 200 feet. Since the light from streetlights shines upwards, even a small amount of light usually makes the tower stand out boldly against a black sky. Now it may not appear when you first arrive at the tower that it's easy to see, but after your eyes adjust to the dark, it will become a lot easier. When climbing downwards, the lighting is different, and here is where I use my headlamp. I wear a headband type flashlight I purchased at our local Walmart for about $8. I also bring along extra AA batteries. If you were going to do a job that would last more than 20 minutes or so, or higher than ambient light would allow you to climb upwards without extra light, I would recommend a style of light with an external gel cell type battery. Also, a surprising amount of light can come from the moon, and when you get above the streetlights, you may be surprised how well you can see with no added light. Some climbers do not like to work on wet towers, which is understandable. Lots of times at night, dew forms on towers, which can make them dripping wet. And I've noticed over the years that this wetness usually only goes to about 20 or 30 feet or so above the ground and then stops. Some of the best scenery I've seen is late at night on a tower. At night, fog can make the visibility poor on the ground, but often stops before you get to the spot on the tower you need to get to. Climbing above the fog on a night with a full moon can provide some spectacular views, as the fog looks thick enough like you could step off the tower and walk on top of it. Too bad this would be nearly impossible to photograph. Finally, I've noticed that Mother Nature tends to calm down at night, say after midnight. If there's a job you've been needing to get done, but wind or storms have kept you off the tower, check out the weather after midnight, then give it a try. Don't forget that ground crew, and never climb alone, especially at night. Also, don't forget extra batteries for your flashlight. And don't use the kind of flashlight you hold in your hand. Spotlights on the ground will only blind you on the tower, so don't let people shine lights up at you. When I do a night job, I often call the local police to let them know I'll be there so I don't get a light shine in my eyes. Plus, if they're bored and the donut shops are closed, they may even offer to be a ground crew for you. Now remember, tower work at any height can easily become deadly. Money spent on books, videos, and climbing gear is well worth the investment. You can email me about this subject at fmgreg@yahoo.com. This is Greg Stoddard, KF9MP, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
And finally this week, a research team at the University of Washington State has developed a prototype of wireless communication that enables a signal to be transmitted by relying on a byproduct of its circuitry's electrical resistance instead of any external source of power. This new system differs from previous so-called passive wireless and backscatter communication systems because, unlike its predecessors, it does not need to make use of sunlight, broadcast TV signals, or ambient temperature differences to provide it with power. The electrical resistance it uses instead is known as Johnson noise, the name given to the charge that electrically conductive materials generate within themselves. The University of Washington prototype, like its predecessors, can function on very little power. The wireless and power-free transmission occurs through the opening and closing of a switch, a transistor, that connects the antenna to a resistor. Findings by the university development team were released by the university and published as well on the Hackaday website and by the news organization known as The Conversation. The researchers write on the university website, "Our system, combined with techniques for harvesting energy from the environment, could lead to all manner of devices that transmit data, including tiny sensors and implanted medical devices, without needing batteries or other power sources. These include sensors for smart agriculture, electronics implanted in the body that never need battery changes, better contactless credit cards, and maybe even new ways for satellites to communicate.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the world on nets and great repeater systems like our newest affiliates, the K2IWR repeater on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, and the K2MST repeater on 443.150 MHz serving all of Syracuse, New York. We welcome them aboard the vast This Week in Amateur Radio network of repeaters and nets around the world. If your net or repeater carries This Week in Amateur Radio, why not let us know about it, and we'll give you a free promo here on the air. All you need to do is put all the details into an email and give us the repeater call sign, frequency, area served, and the days and times that you carry This Week in Amateur Radio, and send it off in an email to w2xbs77@gmail.com. We'd be happy to hear from you. That address, once again, is w2xbs77@gmail.com. We hope to hear from you real soon. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.